right, well, James. So James, as we talked about last week, quick, brief overview, since I realized bad weather. Some of you were not able to make it or didn't come for other as important reasons. James, I give you a list here on authorship of who James likely is. I made the point that there are 4 James mentioned in the Bible, that history and overwhelmingly the majority of Christendom relates this book to the 4th one on that list, the brother of Jesus, who incidentally was also the leader of the church in Jerusalem, the headquarters, so to speak, of Christianity. That it was written somewhere probably in the mid-40s, so it's an early book. That's a pretty early book, actually. When you consider the Gospels that we talked about in the beginning, they start somewhere in like the early mid-50s. James even predates those. Some of Paul's letters certainly predate this, but not many of them. A lot of them come after this. So just a little point about that. Got some key themes on there that you can look at. They come up again and again in James' writings. Let's talk about favoritism. Favoritism, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. I'm going to read it and we'll just kind of talk through it. It says, "My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing come into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing comes also, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, 'You sit here in a good place,' while you say to the poor man, 'You stand over there,' or 'Sit down at my feet,' have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he has promised to those who loved him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich ones who oppress you? And the ones who drag you into court, are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name by which you were called?" Now, I asked last week for you to consider, if you read ahead in James, to consider how James feels about the rich man and the poor man. Now, this is James, how James feels about the rich man and the poor man. This is not what the Bible says about rich people and poor people and so on and so forth. So I don't want to get down in that discussion because it's certainly a different discussion. What does James think about the rich and the poor? How is it being illustrated here? What is he saying here? What does it mean to show partiality according to James?
Maybe racism.
Okay, how so? Interesting.
That they're making such a difference between people's status, where they physically stand, financially stand, and their belief.
Okay.
What their Christianity, how they're using their Christianity.
Okay, I like that. What else?
Was it really his opinion of rich versus poor? Because I'm kind of reading it as he's getting on to them, the church, for making a distinction between and giving preferential treatment to, hey, maybe this guy's going to give us more money.
Right. So I would say yes to both. And the reason why I think James does that is because every time, I'm going to just give you the answer, all right, from what I asked last week. Every time James mentions the rich man, it tends to be in a negative light. Now, that is not the case across Scripture. So there are other times when, once again, wealth is not talked poorly about. It's not even wealth that's talked about here poorly. It's specifically, and I think James has some very specific people in mind because he gives some examples. We're going to, if we get to it, we're going to see that in chapter 5. He's going to come back to this. But to get at the second point that you make, you're exactly right. And I think what you're talking about is an application of this, which is very relevant for us today. I think the point of this is that, yes, there are, in this community, they are liable to have new people come into the congregation who are wearing fine jewelry and clothing. And the tendency of pastors, even today, is to see those individuals and go, hey, you, come right up front here so you can hear me preach loud and clear, right? And you can be in front of everyone. Everyone can see you as an honorary individual. But the poor people, they're like, let's put them in the back so that no one has to look at them. They smell bad, whatever. This is favoritism. This is what James is getting at. So let me say...
The fact that God does not see that.
He doesn't. You're exactly right. And let me say a couple things about this, because I think it's important that we get this clear. I've heard this taught several times, that favoritism applies to having like close friends versus people that you, in other words, like showing favoritism is having some really close friends and never talking to anyone else outside of your circle, okay? That's still, like, you should talk to other people outside of your circle. That's not what this is talking about. Favoritism is not talking about having close friends in your life. It's a really hard case to make that having close friends in your life is unbiblical, considering Jesus himself had inner three. In the context of the 12, in the context of the many, right? So, like, if we're going to go down that road, we sort of have to cast stones at the Lord himself. And I don't think we want to do that. The inner three in Jesus' life and ministry experienced a level of intimacy with Jesus that none of the other disciples ever did. They were with him in the Transfiguration. They were with him in several places that the even other 9 disciples did not experience. It didn't mean that he didn't care for them. It didn't mean that they were treated unfairly. This is how it worked. He had an inner three. He poured the most into them. And when we look at who they became in the grand scheme of Christendom, Peter, James, and John, they became the ones that he ministered to the most closely seem to make the biggest impact. It's typically how it works when you mentor people, when you disciple people. The people you pour the most time in typically are the most equipped, right? So favoritism, I don't think, is teaching something about relationships here. Now, you should be inclusive. You should always be looking out for the person who is kind of on the outside and on the fringe, but they're not mutually exclusive concepts, if that makes sense. Favoritism has to do with winning people's affections who have something that would benefit you. That's really what's going on.
You're not going to say quid pro quo, are you?
No, I will not. I will not say that. Well done.
It seems more like pulling a few very close rather than pushing the others away. That's different to me.
It's different, but they're both kind of they're kissing cousins, if you will, right? So, like, we live in Dallas or Fort Worth, DFW. If we were closer to Dallas, in a, say, a little more affluent megachurch, it would not be uncommon to see certain individuals who play for a certain Dallas team, right? And it would be really tempting. In fact, I would say downright almost impossible for a pastor to see Des Bryant back in the day, or Romo, or Witten, or one of these big guys come into their church and not feel like they needed to go over and chum it up with them. You know what I mean? And what's the motivation behind that? The motivation is, if Jason Witten comes to my church, or Tony Romo comes to my church, A, they got a lot of money, so if they're really legit Christians, they're going to tithe a lot. But B, a lot of people want to come here to see them. Now, apart from the fact that it's highly blasphemous to want people to come to your church for anything other than Jesus, it's getting at the heart of what is going on here. Now, it would be hard. I mean, I'm a huge football fan. I'm not going to lie. If one of those guys walked in, I'd be like, holy crap, Kelsey, you better kick it up a notch this morning, you know? And then the Spirit would have to rebuke me, and I'd have to pretend like I didn't recognize them. I'm like, hi, you look familiar. Do I know you? But then that would be lying, and it would still be bad. The point is, I think that you don't offer these individuals anything more than you offer anyone else. And you don't shun people away because they lack something. If we pushed away every drug addict that came to our church, we'd be like half the size, right? It's kind of hard to do this when you're in hospital ministry, because like the poor guy's the one we're going after most of the time, right? Poor in spirit, at least. And I think that's kind of the concept here. But there are some practices that we engage in here at City on a Hill that are intentional, that are shaped from this passage. So just to be like completely transparent with you. James and I have no idea what any of you give. If you give, we have no idea. We don't look at that. We have no access to seeing those kinds of things.
He knows where I live. He's been to my house.
Not live. Give. Now we know where all of you live. Yeah.
He wore a blindfold on his way over.
Yeah, if you filled out a care card, we have all your addresses. We don't do the giving. It's not a part of our weekly routine. And we do that very intentionally. Because sometimes we have to say things from the pulpit and from a class setting that might hack one of you off. And if you're big givers, I might be tempted to shape that in such a way where I don't hack you off as much. And I'm not going to do that.
You didn't even address them here that it was only their view of rich people that were oppressing people that
Yes.
were called by the name of the Lord, the one that they were dishonoring them.
So that, and he does it even more in chapter 5, but he does bring it up here. And that's kind of where we get this negative view of these particular rich people. He's saying, are these not the ones who brought you to court and dishonored you and did all these, are they not the same? And yet you're bringing them into the front row to have the best seat in the house? What kind of idiocy? But it's human nature. It's human nature to want this, to want affluence, to think that there are other means of building a church other than the gospel. And James is like, there's not. I remember there's a great illustration of this. Years ago now, gosh, it was probably it was before Camellia was born, so it must have been 2011, 2012. Chris and I went to New Mexico, and we were going to check out a potential campsite for the youth for that year. And it was a new camp. We hadn't participated with him before. And rather than driving all the way to New Mexico in one day, we left in the afternoon and we drove to not Odessa, Midland. And stayed the night in Midland with a friend of Chris's that was a youth pastor up there, or at the time was still there. He's not there anymore, he moved. But we stayed with him and checked out their church. He was the youth pastor at First Baptist Midland. And if you know anything about Midland, it's an extremely wealthy town. It's a lot of millionaires, a lot of oil there, so just a lot of very wealthy people. This church spent, I think it was somewhere to the tune of $80 million renovating their sanctuary, and they actually lost 40 seats. It made it smaller somehow, just making it nicer. And just a really ridiculously wealthy church. And they had, top-notch facilities. They had this baptistry that looked like a natural waterfall into this ravine, in their foyer, and it had it was crazy. And Christian was the name of the youth pastor there, really great guy. He's a youth pastor. Actually, he's a lead pastor now in Louisiana. And he was there. He said, the most awkward moment I've ever had was that year. They had this Russian missionary come over and spend some time in their church, and he was going to preach. He spoke English. He was going to preach and all that. And they'd been supporting him or something. I don't remember the connection. But in Russia, where he was at, the Christianity is illegal. You cannot be a Christian legally. And so to be a Christian means you have to really mean to be. There's a lot at stake. And they brought him in, and the first morning he got there, the whole pastoral staff and all their suits and their nice stuff took this man around to show him this campus, the worship center and the gym, this beautiful multi-million-dollar gym, and just the whole gamut. And he said it was about a 45-minute tour, and each one of these guys and some of the board of trustees were there, and they were talking about this and that, and these stones were procured from Israel, and and all that, and the man was just very quiet. And he said at the end of the discussion, the pastor said, "So what do you think?" And the Russian guy said, "I am amazed at how far you've come without God." And Christian was like, okay. He's sort of, I don't want to be here for that. Yeah, it was really, really shocking. And I just think that is so illustrative of what is at the heart of this passage, that you can't, I mean, you can build really impressive looking things, right? You can, I mean, look at any, I don't want to say any because that's not a fair statement. Look at a lot of mega churches. They're run like businesses, like corporations. The pastor's the CEO. They don't have elders, they have trustees. Everything is managed, everything is governed like a corporation. If you're not making the quota, you're fired. We need somebody else. You know, we need production, we need numbers, we need end results. And a lot of money goes into it, and there are some impressive looking productions that these churches can put on. Incredible. And there is a part of me, and a creative part of me, that I'm like, man, I wish we had that. I wish we had that stage. I wish we had those backdrops. I wish we had that film crew. Because think of all the things we could do, right? And then I think about the cost of that and the heart of that. And once again, that's not to put down every megachurch. There are some megachurches out there, big churches that have very godly men leading them, and they're very faithful to the text. But the point is it's easy to get wrapped up in thinking that because you have a lot of nice big things, you're doing well. Or because you have a lot of people in the seats, you're doing the right thing. And it's just not true. It's easy to gather a crowd. It's easy to build a following. I mean, look at any of the dumb cults out there, right? We're going to talk about them in like 19 years when we're done with this class. But think about it. I mean, like some of the things that people follow, I look at it and I'm like, why? How did that happen, right? But it's just because it's not hard to gather a following. It's hard to make disciples. They count.
Don't you think there's people out there too, whether it be city leaders, mayors, governors, whatever, go to specific churches for that very reason?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there are. I know. You know, once again, it's not to cast judgment. I understand the move here, but there are third-party ministries that are not churches. They're like, you know, for lack of better terminology, parachurch ministries. Not that all parachurch ministries are bad. There's a lot of great ones. But I know people who are leaders in those, I've known in the past, that were like, we'd really love to come here, but we need to be in a bigger church so we can meet more people and network and get more, you know, like church for them is not a place to be a part of the body. It's a place to kind of get their ministry going. So, you know, these are the kinds of decisions that people make, affluent people make, is, you know, where are the shiniest lights and the comfiest seats.
Well, not to go off rail with this word favoritism, but I've been in many circles in this church for years, off and on, you know, here and there. And the phrase that keeps coming up, and it really hurts my heart, that there seems to be cliques.
Mm-hmm.
They use that word cliques in the certain areas in the church.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't ask them what they're talking about or anything because I don't want to know. But that bothers me that people come up to that judgment and conclusion that there are, you know, cliques and circles of exclusion in the church.
Once again, I think that there, you know, and every situation is different. That word is used a lot for close-knit groups of people, and once again, I would challenge them to use that word for the inner three in Jesus. The only time I think it becomes a problem is when people are saying, I want to participate, and they're like, no. And I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm blind, but I've never seen that happen. I have never seen that kind of thing
I have
happen.
witnessed it, and I have witnessed some people leave because they
Yeah.
can't seem to find
Yeah.
the path and the stream that they
Sure.
want to get into.
And you know, the thing too, something that I have personally experienced, I mean, I have still friends that don't even go here anymore, that this church lends itself, I think, well to that kind of relationship, is the kind of heart work that we do here. If you've ever been in a freedom group and you bore your soul to someone, you tend to grow a pretty good connection with those people. And I think that's how God intends it, if I'm being frank with you. And so it's easy, if you're doing the process, if you're going through these things, to meet people that you want to remain friends with for a very long time. And, you know, I would say to anyone that is limiting or saying, no, you can't be a part of this, that's a problem. That needs to be addressed.
Well, I
I've
never
never seen
got
it.
that particular idea. I got the feeling that what they were talking about was how certain people made them feel. I don't
Mhm.
think they were ever actually just verbally said, no, you can't, you
Yeah.
know. But it was how they translated the feelings of the, what you call the vibes of how people were making them feel.
Sure, and it's complicated. It's complicated, right? I mean, because like there are times when I feel, you know, very specific things from very close people in my wife, right? And I'll ask her like, hey, why'd you say that way, or why didn't? She's like, what do you mean? You know, and it's just me reading something. So it's a whole. I mean, I think that's a much more complicated scenario than I can solve in one evening, or maybe ever. The point is that getting to that and bringing this back full circle, that's not what this is talking about. This is not talking about cliques. It's not talking about close-knit friends or groups of people. It's talking about demonstrating a level or a behavior to someone based on what you can get out of them or what you can't get out of them, and kind of discarding them. If that's happening, and it is, I think, really from a leadership perspective, but I think it happens at a lay level as well, where, you know, I don't know that I really want this person in my life group, or I don't know that I want to sit next to this person in class, and it's kind of like, you know, don't judge appearances or what you think you can get out of them.
I always view the church, I don't know, I hear clique and I hear almost like this confining thing, but I've always viewed the church as a place where you're equipping the saints for the purpose of the ministry. You know, you have a home church where you're growing and changing. If you leave the same as you come in, that's not good.
Right.
I've always viewed it as a place where you're being equipped for the ministry outside the walls of the church.
Yes.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm hearing a couple different things, you know.
Yeah.
I know some of the mega church mentalities can be skewed, but I also think that some of them have the thing where you come in, you get ready to go out, and the more we can bring in, the more can go out.
Yeah.
So to me, it's an equipping place.
It is.
Learning to go.
It is an equipping place, but it is in the context of discipleship, which is relational at its core. At least Jesus' model of it is, and Paul's, from what we know. Now, there is like a teaching capacity, and there's like the equipping gifts, if you will, that you're talking about. And so Sunday morning, that's generally when that happens. Wednesday nights by tradition, but you know, could be any night. Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that we never want to communicate to you guys is that discipleship is coming on Wednesday night and Sunday morning and learning about the Bible. That's a part of discipleship. But once again, the one another's of the New Testament are so like radically important, and they're impossible if relationships aren't being formed. So what I would say is, regardless of the size of the church that you attend, whether it's here or if God moves you elsewhere, make sure that you are in relationships with people, that you have people you are doing these things and practicing these things with. Do you need to be in like a one-on-one or one-on-three, you know, weekly discipleship meeting? If you can, great. I don't think you have to be. I don't think discipleship has to look like one model, but it does have to include relationships. Otherwise, it's just learning, and learning's good, but applying is as good.
Even Jesus sent them out in twos.
Yes, absolutely.
Deliver the word, now he sends them out. So that you have a like-minded, iron sharpened iron, someone alongside you doing the work.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in the verses you started with, 2:1-7. He's kind of laying, to me, he's laying the predicate for what he's observed occurring.
Right.
And then he puts the hammer down, starting in the next verses, where he talks about showing partiality, and that's digressing away from the law.
Yes, absolutely.
He equates it to adultery and murder.
Yeah.
And reminds them. So I think it's pretty strong.
It's very
strong stuff.
James doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
I mean, he gets kind of down to it.
But it's interesting because it seems to me that he spent his time watching and observing. And, so he starts by relating to them and talking to them about what they probably know they've been doing.
Right. That's good. Any other thoughts?
I just think God has led me all over the place in different seasons. I mean, I've been at several churches. When my kids were younger, I had them at a church that they were going to get fed with a great youth. I had to leave a church I really loved, but my kids weren't being fed. And then, as just different things came up in my life, I got led to different churches for different reasons. And I got led to this church because of my sobriety. I met Marcia in AA, but there may be a time that but I like visiting different places, and I get fed wherever I go.
Sure. Well, and I think the other part of this too, and this is another thing that I would say, because and you're right, God will, He does lead people to different places in different seasons. But I think to counter that, the one thing that I always challenge people, and myself before I was on the actual staff here, is that church is an equipping place. That is our job. That is our role, to equip you. But the church is likened to the body, and the body has many members, and the members have different functions. And when those functions work together, the body accomplishes what the head is directing the body to do. And so I also would be very cautious to not leave you with thinking that church is meant simply to feed you or to equip you in this kind of spiritual way, void of being a part of the body as a member that functions in the whole. You see what I'm saying? So because I do hear people from time to time, inevitably, no church is perfect, so people will say, well, we don't do this well, and so I'm kind of thinking of leaving. And I'm like, well, have you served there? I mean, you see an issue, you're a part of the body. It's not my job to fix everything that you see as a problem. It's my job to encourage you and equip you to be enough to go and serve there, because God's put that on your heart. You see it. It's an issue. So when are you going to go? And, a lot of people hear that and kind of nod their head, and they've already sort of made up their mind and they go. But that's the truth. That's the reality, that we are a body. We all serve a very specific role, and it's very hard. You'll be hard-pressed, and this is not to knock at all changing churches or going to different places. So hear me when I say that. But I had a young couple people early in my time here that left, and I did a lot of study on it because something felt wrong about the way it went. And you won't find in the New Testament, I can tell you because I've done the work, you will not find people leave the church because it just didn't fit them. Like that's not a biblical reason to leave a local church. The only biblical reason I can find to leave a local church is when the church is being led by a heretic, someone who is openly false teaching and unwilling to be corrected and continues down that path. At that point, when you have exhausted options, then I think it's safe to say you need to leave.
Could I ask kind of an interesting question?
Please. I love interesting questions.
I know in the Old Testament, anytime people gathered, they gathered together in a synagogue. Mm-hmm. In the New Testament, it was houses.
Sometimes.
Right, but when the Lord referred to the word church, and I know that He wants us to assemble one together, the church was always your physical body. We are the church. Mm-hmm. It was never referred to as a building, right, so to speak, just an assembly. Yeah. So, I don't know, I just wanted to know your thoughts on that, identifying the church as a building rather than the person.
Yeah, I would never identify the church as a building. I think the building is sometimes referred to because it's where the body gathers, right?
Assembly place?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so you have in Greek, right, the, what is it? Ecclesia, right, which is sort of the word that it literally just means, a gathering or the gathered ones. Interestingly enough, Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament that's a name that's rendered from the Septuagint, and when you read Ecclesiastes, it's the preacher is the one who's writing. It says like the preacher says da 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 da. It's typically credited to Solomon, but it never says Solomon. he refers to himself as the preacher. But when you look at that word, it's really like the assembler, which is why we translate it as preacher, because when you think of like the one who is assembling and speaking to the assembly, we typically call that person a preacher. You see it all throughout the Old Testament. When Moses is in the wilderness, in the Septuagint, the gathering of the people there in the wilderness is the ecclesia. It's just a gathered group of people. I think where the distinction gets made, is everyone following this? Where we're going with this? So Jesus, for example, will say, you are Simon Bar-Jonah, and on this rock I will build my church, ecclesia. What is he talking about there? Is he talking about a building? Is he talking about He's talking about the universal church, the, dare I say, Catholic church. Catholic just means universal. I was trying to be controversial, and I'm really not. So this is the universal church. You get this in Ephesians, where Paul talks about the church being built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, and he's clearly talking about the universal church. But in all the other letters, you have specific churches. To the church in Thessalonica, to the church in Rome, to the gathering of Christians in, wherever, Galatia. And so we distinguish these letters as these were written to churches, sometimes plural, like Paul says in Timothy, that, to go to the various churches and raise up elders. So now we have elders. Now we have a hierarchy governing these local gatherings. So whether they're in a home, which they start out in Acts, early Acts, by mid to late Acts, they're actually not, interestingly enough. And by 2nd century, they're almost exclusively in buildings by that point. 3rd century for sure, because we have archaeological evidence. The early churches would sometimes gather in the synagogue. They would sometimes gather in Solomon's portico, which was on the outer part of the temple there, where there was lots of places where the gathering would take place. If we, for example, planned Easter Sunday at Levitt Pavilion, let's just say we did something like that. We won't, don't worry. But if we did, we wouldn't say come to Levitt Pavilion Church. We'd be like, hey, come join City on a Hill for Easter Sunday at Levitt Pavilion. So I think that's a great question and distinction that is important to make every time we talk about this, that the church is not this building. It's not this, right? It's the gathering of people. Specifically, it is the body, which is why I think Paul uses that illustration so much, that the body indicates that every person that is a part of it has a role, has a function. There's not it's not like, hey, I'm the hands and you're the feet, and all those people out there, they're just I don't know, hair that just sits there. I don't know, clearly didn't think about this before I said it, but you know what I mean? I mean, it's like everyone has a role, a function. And so I always would challenge you all to, when you think about this, when you think about the church and your identity in the church, what is your identity in the church? What do you see the church as? What is the purpose of it? Is it to just come and get something? Is it to come and learn more and grow in your faith? I mean, those are good things, but do you see yourself as a part of it? Because when I say the church, I don't mean me and James and Kelsey and anyone else on staff and Charlie, who's an elder. I mean every one of you, if you're here. Make sense? It's a good question. Did that sort of address what you were talking about?
Kind of.
Yeah? We'll say more. I'd love to know. We have all the time.
Yeah, no, I think we will. No, I was just thinking about the way that Jesus identified us individually, as individuals.
Yeah.
He said, you are the church. We are the church.
Right.
So they wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to
Church.
Yeah, I'm going to the gathering, I think would be. Well, let me give you another quick little, just something to think about. Check this out. This is good. This is a fun one. So go to Ephesians for a minute. I know we've already covered it. You're like, why are we going backwards? Yeah, just humor me. So, chapter 2, Ephesians 2. This is one of my favorite passages because it is such a beautiful presentation of the gospel. But Paul says, "And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. But God, being rich in mercy," and so on and so forth, because He loved us, He made us alive together. That whole passage, and a large majority, hear me when I say this, over 90% of Paul's writings in which he says, you were doing this, but God made you alive, is in Greek to our vernacular of English, y'all. Yeah, plural. Second person plural. All y'all. Yes, absolutely. And all y'all were dead in all y'all's trespasses and sins. Amen. So I think sometimes we have a tendency to individualize the message of Scripture apart from the context of the local body, when the reality is the majority of the New Testament is written to the gathering, not to me. So there's a really interesting study that I did a year ago now. I was in a New Testament reading seminar on Pauline literature, and Dr. Son was the lecturer for that, and he's a Korean, and he wrote his dissertation on the corporal elements. This sounds really, I'll explain in a minute, corporal elements of Pauline literature. And basically his premise was that as a Korean man coming to study in the United States, one of the things that shocked him more than anything else was how we individualize so much of Christianity. It's always like, what's my role? What's God saying to me? What's God, directing me to do? And he said that, in Korea, we don't think of ourselves individually. We think of ourselves within a whole, like family in Korea. You're not like a singular person. You exist as a part of a unit. So everything you do is done with the either support of or rejection of the unit that you live in. And if they don't approve, then you don't do it. And we look at that and we're like, why are they so oppressive to you? You need to get independence and go and study the things you want to study and be the person you want to be. And in their mind, it's not oppressive, it's their identity. There's a really good movie that came out. It's not Korean, it's actually Japanese, because the Japanese think the same way, called The Farewell. Very, very good movie. It stars the Awkwafina, yeah. And it's a great movie. I highly recommend watching it because it will challenge your Western mind. It's about a woman, a Japanese girl who lives in the United States. Her grandmother is dying from stage 4 cancer. And the family has taken her to an American doctor. That's how they find out. She doesn't speak English. The doctor tells them in English, so she has no idea she's dying. The family decides not to tell her that she's dying. And even more than that, in order to see Grandma one last time, because she's like the staple of the family, they go as far as to orchestrate a fake wedding where one of her grandchildren is marrying this other girl. And so the whole family is coming to see her. Maybe it's not Japan, it's China. I can't believe I mixed those up. It is China. Although the Japanese do think this as well. They go to this wedding. They have this whole wedding, this whole fake thing, and there's speeches, and they spend tons of money, and they're not even getting married. It's just an excuse for everybody to come from the different countries to see Grandma before she dies because they don't want to tell her. And Awkwafina's character has grown up in the United States, and so she's westernized, right? And she is like, I don't understand, y'all are crazy. This is illegal. We can't do this. This is wrong. This is not okay. And there's this great moment where she's talking with her uncle, and he says to her, you only want to tell her because you can't bear the burden of it on your own. And so you want to release yourself of it. And he said, we have to be strong for her while she's weak. And you understand that, like, it really isn't, they're not trying to be deceptive. They love her. They want her to enjoy her last days, not worrying about all the stuff. And at the end of the movie, you find out, like, she's lived for like 4 years after that, and it's really great. But that is exactly what Dr. Son's point was in Paul's letters, is that as a Korean, he reads Paul's letters from a very communal perspective. He does not see God speaking to Dr. Son individually that much, because he doesn't see Christianity as something that Dr. Son is doing. He sees his identity within the body. And so I think that is so helpful to not only what you're talking about, but to just the whole discussion of what is the church? What is the gathering? Is it a place? No. Is it a group of people? Yes, but it is a group of people who I identify as a part of collectively, so that my gifts, my passions, the things that I choose to do, the ways in which I choose to serve God are all formed based on my identity within that group. I think that if we could understand that more clearly, the church would be a more, I hate to use this word because it's not, it really doesn't capture the heart of what I'm getting at, but a more productive place. Because it would be a lot less about what I am getting and more about who I am in the context of all this. My relational issues and the way I deal with my own hurts and wounds and character flaws changes dramatically when I don't see this as me in a place that I call church, but rather me existing in the body. Yes.
Well, the whole concept, and particularly the Asian concept, is that there is unity, power, and strength in unity, in
Yes.
groups. And all the way from James all the way through Jude here in the New Testament, it's not written to one specific church. It's to the general Christian population
Yes.
everywhere.
Yes.
So you kind of have to think outside that, but yet, like we say, cliche, I'm going to church. Well, yeah, in my mind, I'm going to a building, but yet I'm going to be with the church body
Yes.
as a whole. But we've always heard that, even in armed forces and anywhere else, there is power and strength in unity, in numbers.
Yeah.
In numbers. So, that's how they see everything.
And I've even changed the way I ask questions to people. Like I work out at this gym with a lot of people that I don't typically know, and the question I always ask people is, where do you worship at? Because I try to get away from where do you go to church? Where do you worship at? Where's your home? Where's your home gathering? When I'm going, or when I'm talking about Sunday morning, I typically will say things like, I love gathering with God's people. Because that, once again, kind of captures, I think, more of the essence of what this word means. And when you understand it at that level, then something like James chapter 2 becomes all the more abhorrent, right? When you see the gathering as a body, and then you talk about propping someone up who isn't even a part of the body just because they have affluence, it just seems like so weird.
Well, that's the point. It's written to Christians.
Right.
Everybody in this room has friends outside of this church that
Right.
are Christians.
Yeah.
So these words are written to Christians,
Right.
Everywhere, not just to a church.
Well, I think to be totally fair, I think he does have someone in mind here. I think this is a local place here, because he's using, and we're going to find out in chapter 5, there's just some pretty obvious examples that he's giving where I don't think this is happening in every congregation, these specific things, if that makes sense. But yes, it is true across the board. Any other thoughts, questions? Did that get at it? Ish?
The Asian culture.
Go ahead.
How do you balance, we are the hospital church.
Mm-hmm.
So that, to me, that infers that if you are a hurting person, you come and you get well.
Mm-hmm.
That's our main focus, right?
Right.
But when you get well, then you pay it forward.
Right.
You pay it forward. So do you feel like we emphasize that part enough, and do we give people opportunities and channels and ways to pay it forward rather than just, well, you read the book, good for you.
Right. I think it's a great question. I think it's something that we have always struggled with, because typically what happens is people get well and then they feel like, all right, well, I can go off and whatever, right? We have gotten away from, I think one of the biggest things that we did wrong, and we've corrected it over the years, is making our identity that. And what I mean by that is specifically with freedom groups. No one believes in freedom groups more than I do. I'm the product of a lot of hard work, okay? But when the emphasis becomes all that, then the idea is like, well, once I'm better, now I can move off because I don't need this anymore, which is in and of itself bogus, because unless you're dead and in glory, you're still going to have issues. But beyond that, church, once again, it's not meant to be a place where you work on your heart, right? It's a place to gather, to glorify God, to be equipped to do the work of the ministry, and to do Christian community together. So that's like one part of it, Christian community, one part of it. And I think we've done a pretty good job of balancing that now in terms of just who we are, right? Our Freedom Group ministry has never been stronger than it is right now. We have like 40 different groups that we offer. Brian has he's killed it, right? In a good way. He's done an incredible job. We have more facilitators than we've had in years. It's very healthy, and yet it's not, you'll notice on Sunday mornings, the thing that we're piping out every single Sunday. Because we have so much more to offer than that, right? But any church struggles with this. Even churches who are just doing normal Sunday morning, Sunday school, and that's it. People come to know the Lord, they grow in their faith, and then it's like, I think that serving in the church is sometimes similar to parenting, maybe, in that if you were to ask me before Camellia was born, are you ready to be a father? I'd have been like, no, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I just started doing it, right? And I think that's kind of how serving in the church is. It's like you never really feel like I'm officially ready to start leading people. But at some point, you just have to decide, I'm going to do it. And God's going to use me or He's not. And I'm going to find out real fast what my calling is and where I'm supposed to be. And then it's amazing what happens when. So, but I think there's just that moment, and maybe we don't challenge people enough. I certainly feel like I do, but I don't know for sure. You don't know what you don't know. But I know that there is tons of opportunity on Sunday morning to plug in somewhere and do something. If you're like, I don't really do well with people, I don't like to greet people, show up early and make coffee. You'll be everyone's favorite person, because we love coffee here. I don't like doing menial tasks, but I love to talk with people. Great, be on the host team. I love the Bible. I want to share what I have. Awesome. Let's talk about being a team. There's just so many places where, I love screaming children. Wonderful. Let's get you over there, right? So it's like, there are very few of you. There's always a place. There's always a place. Maybe we could do better. I think we've done better in the last few years than we have in the 12 years I've been here.
Her leadership meeting was quite extraordinary.
It was fun.
So that means there is a church turnover, maybe a generational turnover,
Maybe.
as I'm seeing things grow and change.
Yeah. We'll see.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's encouraging.
How would you, with all the technology stuff that's out today, and I can stay home and watch church online and all of it, how do you, I think I already know what you're going to say, but I just figured I'd ask to see what you would say about that type of atmosphere that's available today.
It is such a hard balance, right? Because, what a great tool we've been given in modern technology. How cool is it that, if you have the flu, you can still not feel like you were away from the teaching ministry of the church? I think that is amazing. When I had meningitis in 2014, I missed like 3 weeks. And like for someone who is like, this is my job, I'm here 6, sometimes 7 days a week. Being gone for that amount of time felt like, do I even exist? Do I know anyone? I mean, it's so weird. And so being able to like cast in and see that is awesome. So there's 2 downsides. One is for people who are a part of the church, it can, like any good thing, become a bad habit. So like, you're sick one week, you're not feeling well the next week. Oh, but I got this like work function, and then now it's been a month, and it becomes real easy to just go like, I'll catch it up, I'll watch later, And then you remove yourself from everything we're just talking about, which is you're not really a part of the gathering at that point. So I think it's a helpful tool when it is necessary. It's all about the heart at that point, which is why I would never draw like any kind of, hey, if you miss this many, then you're doing something, because there are times when it can legitimately be several weeks and be okay.
Yeah, I use it as a tool to tell people that don't go here.
Right.
Go online and watch a sermon.
Yeah.
And familiarize yourself with our pastor.
Yeah.
And see if it's something that's in line with what you're looking for.
That's great. That's a great tool for it.
That's what brought us here.
Yeah.
As we started watching sermons online.
And we didn't scare you off?
I will admit that James's eye patch kind of freaked me out.
Yeah. Good. That's good.
Well, we're moving to Midland, so we're gonna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hope not. No. Let's pray for them right now. Let's just. Here's the other thing. I saw this on Twitter one time years ago when the whole like video podcast thing got really popular, and it was a well-known preacher that I respect a lot, and he said it's great that the guy on screen preaches a great message, but is he visiting you in the hospital? And I think that like that strikes at the heart of it's funny. The Village did this for a while, and they still have this model, but they're rolling away from it with like satellite campuses, and they see Matt Chandler on a screen. They call him Flat Chandler, which is seriously, it's really awesome. But that is such a dangerous model. Like I would be okay with that if it were for the sake of planting a church with a very definitive, like, this is how long we're going to do this for, and then this is how long, and we're going to have campus pastors, and before you know it, y'all are going to be your own thing. If you can leverage a really gifted teacher to build a community and then transition, praise God, all for it.
That's what the disciples did.
It is.
People were coming at them, and they had to train other people up to minister to the needs of the people.
They did, but the key is that they weren't being expedited out into a place where they weren't tangible. And that's like, you and maybe you will believe it because maybe you have church experiences like this. So many people have come to me and said, you don't know how shocked I am to see you in the foyer on Sunday morning. The last church I went to, I couldn't even come within 15 feet of the lead pastor or the teaching pastors there. And I'm like, why? Like, what kind of horrible life is that? There are some places that like the office of the senior pastor is connected to the stage. And he will literally, he'll sit in his office while the worship's going on. He'll come out, he'll preach his message, and he'll go back into his office. That would drive me crazy. I would not be able to do that. I could not do that. I'm in my office enough. I don't want to be there on Sunday morning, But it's like that kind of thing. Okay, let me give you another example.
Let me interject right here. I've been home for the past 2 weeks sick with the flu.
Yeah.
The sound and the live video are fantastic now.
Thank you. Look at this.
They are very
Kelsey Barker, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Install out, go away, come back.
Yeah.
It's been very good.
That's beautiful. I had an experience 3 weeks ago on a Friday night. We took my wife's brother out for his birthday to. We were going to go to Texas Roadhouse in Mansfield, but we ended up going to Saltgrass because it was like a 2-hour wait. So we went to Saltgrass and middle of Mansfield, and we had this guy waiter, really great. We ordered our food, and I guess he was probably overloaded. He had another table or section of tables, and so this other gal came out with the food, and she sat down and looked at me, and she goes, hey, you're my pastor. And listen to my response. I am? I mean, like, I saw the words coming out of my mouth, and I wanted to grab them back. And I said, I'm really sorry. I started laughing. I said, I feel horrible that I don't know your name. What is your name? She told me her name, and she said, we've been coming for probably 4 weeks. My mother-in-law and I, we sit here in the second service, and so on and so forth. And I was like, wow, like that is so, I said, come up and say hi to me next time you're there. I'd love to actually put a name to a face in the gathering. And so it was really a pleasant deal. And
I thought you were going to say she'd been watching you on the Facebook.
No.
I do share it.
So-
I do it most of the time.
So 10 minutes go by, and she comes back, and she said, I got to tell you this. She said, I've invited several friends to church as well, and one of the couples is here tonight. They're over in the other area eating dinner. And I just went over there and I said, hey, my pastor's here eating dinner with his wife and family. And they said, is he the one that had the surgery in between services? That's me, right here. Right. And so Jessica's mom is like, hysterical at this point. And she's like, this is so weird. Like, we're not even in Fort Worth, we're in the middle of Mansfield, and this is all happening. So then another 5 minutes go by, and our waiter comes back up, and she's coming up behind him smiling, and she goes, I forgot to tell you, he's been to your church as well. I invited him 2 weeks ago, and he goes, yeah, we really liked it there a lot. We were out of town last week, but we're planning on coming again. And I'm like, what is happening? Who are all of you people? It was so crazy. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But here's the point, is like, it's funny and it's great, and she's apparently an evangelist because she's inviting everyone she knows. But I felt like really kind of guilty a little bit, because I'm like, I don't even recognize you, and I'm your pastor. And like, that kills me. And we're not even a mega church. So that's where like this is why we push small groups so strongly here. It's why we make ourselves available in the foyer. It's why I give my cell phone number out to people, because I just don't ever want to be known as like, yeah, he's my pastor. Cool. What's he like? He's really engaging on the stage. Yeah, but like, what's he like? I don't know. I've never talked to him. Like, I don't know that I'm your pastor.
That's really sweet though, after 4 times visiting that you're her pastor.
Yeah.
That's
It's precious. No, and it's wonderful. And this gal, I'm telling you, she's like, we need to put her in Evangelism Explosion or something, because she will win every soul, right? I mean, she's... Say again?
But she got a good tip.
She did. She did. And she was here Sunday, and I didn't see her, but someone was like, yeah, Tiffany Hodges, the girl you met at the steakhouse, she was here.
James used to apologize to us for his unattentiveness, because in the beginning he tells you he's not a people person, you know, and he would walk right past you and not recognize you, but his mind was somewhere else,
right.
And he's better now.
He is.
Now that he has single vision, he's much better.
Yeah. He's just trying to figure out where he's walking most days. So.
Just don't walk up on his blind side.
Right. I think all that to say that I think, if we're being honest, the way that we understand the gathering needs biblical support, right? We are cast into a culture, especially in the Bible Belt, we're cast into a culture that emphasizes a lot of the wrong things. And so that's helpful, and I hope it is helpful for you tonight to think through these things and for the Holy Spirit to show you those things, because, I believe the church is the hope of the world. I believe that God's plan and purpose for redemption is rooted in the church, specifically the local church. And so it's fundamentally important for us as believers to understand how God feels about the church, how it is to operate, and how we fit into that mechanism. Because if we do, and if we are living out how God has called us to live out, then I guarantee you the community that the gathering is a part of looks a lot different. It changes.
I'm going to ask a hard question because it's been on my heart for quite a while. speaking of the church, and, you know, we're supposed to bear one another's burdens and pray for one another. I attended service one time, and it was a service where Pastor James was explaining the depression that he'd been going through. And, you know, he was apologizing to the church because he felt like he hadn't been able to kind of give it his all. And anyway, I was feeling something really strong when he was talking. And I remember him saying something about praying for him, and I was wondering why that we as a church body didn't stop at that moment and all join our prayers together and pray for our pastor.
Yeah.
In a church setting when he is standing before us, sharing this very broken place that he was. Because see, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, because I felt there was a missed opportunity for us as a body of Christ to pray for our pastor.
Right.
And I was wondering why that didn't happen.
Well, I can tell you, I can only guess. I was not there that Sunday. I remember that very vividly, because I had preached, I think, twice to kind of just give him a respite, and he wanted to come back, and what that had to do with, he wouldn't mind me talking about. I mean, he talked about from the stage, is he took himself off particular medicine. So it wasn't just depression that he was fighting, but he was fighting the withdrawals of it, the stomach. There's just a lot of physical stuff that goes with it. And thorns, that was the name of the message. I remember it. And so I was traveling that next weekend, so it worked out well that he wanted to just have a Sunday to be able to kind of, confess what he felt like was short-sighted on his part in doing that. So I can't say for certain why that didn't happen. I can say, knowing him, he would not have wanted that planned, nor probably done in the spur of the moment, because he already felt what he was feeling, and I think he would have felt like, if you know anything about James, James wants nothing more than the spotlight to be off of him. He hates it. He is one of the most burdened preachers and pastors I've ever met.
Well, there's nothing wrong with a pastor that prays over you continually, for you to be able to kind of surround him.
Absolutely. And there have been times, yeah, right. And there have been times where, not in many recent years past, I think it was a couple years ago, where he had a heart arrhythmia episode kick in really bad. And I know James super well. I know his cadence very well. And I was shocked when he stopped, because I did not even catch anything wrong with him at all. And he stopped. It was very early into the message, maybe 10 minutes, and just said, I can't do this right now. And we did. We actually got up on stage. Yeah. We laid hands on him. We took a lot of time and prayed. So we do that. I think it's just a matter of the moment, and if anyone is willing to kind of jump up and do it.
He has promised he will not get off his medication ever again.
He has. He makes it's hard. It's hard for him.
Yeah, the context of what he was trying to, I think, convey at that time was that, and part of the apology was that he finally recognized that God had given, the knowledge and the wisdom to produce those types of medications, that he actually had an organic dysfunction, and that those medications were made to correct that.
Well, and that was the point. He had been
he
trying to
kept
do it
denying
himself.
that and going off of it, thinking, well,
he had been trying to do it
everything,
himself.
God will take care of it. Well, God will take care of it, but He's given those
That's right.
things.
Yeah,
And I
that's
think
what he
he's
finally said.
come to that point. I've walked through a lot of times in a lot of different things, and there have been a group of strong people, prayer warriors, praying over him. Calling, praying over the phone, going to his house, sitting with him at his house, and praying over him. So.
I did understand what he was saying, but my heart was so heavy, feeling like the pastor just looked like he's really going through something, and we should I just felt like, why hold him up, cover him.
It's a reasonable question.
Well, I think it's some more of what he tries to teach here at the church, of the brokenness God finally brought him to the point, you cannot do this alone. You know, like when I was being healed from cancer, okay, fine. I got well, I recovered, but it was through man's medicine as well that I had to submit to, even though the elders had prayed for me and I felt like I was healed. But I still had to go through the process of using chemo, you know, to get final healing. And I think that's James's point this past time was he finally, the realization and the reality of being broken came to the point that he could not, and that is the humility that we all love in him, is the fact that he can be humble and express himself to the congregation that way. That, you know, and to people to let them know they're not alone when they go through these problems like that, you know. That we can't a lot of times handle things like that on our own.
He's a remarkable example in a lot of ways, and one that has honored so many people around him in ways that most men in his position don't. You have a question?
Yeah, his hospital gown's wide open most of the time.
Not really a question, just I'm going to back up a little bit for what y'all were talking about earlier. Clearly we're not going to get through much more of this, but I just wanted to say that I appreciate at this church that we don't do things and say we've always done it this way. That you guys are open to this worked, this didn't work, let's change it, let's, you know, and I love that it's growing and it's changing, you know, for what we need, you know.
Amen.
And then the other thing is, you giving out your phone number. I mean, I think that's, wow, you know, that's amazing. And I appreciate that you did that, and I get texts now. So,
I'm sorry it took so long to get you on the list.
That's okay. And then, like, knowing who those people were, and then you remember this too, just, you know, following weeks, you're like, hey, Shirley, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know my name. And it made me feel special too, so.
I want nothing more than to convey as a pastor or a teacher that at the end of the day, I am 0% more important than any of you. I do that for a couple of reasons. One, because it's scriptural. There isn't like a premium put on any other position. Okay, I got to say this as a joke because it is somewhat scriptural that that teaching elders are to be paid double. So just for what it's worth, it does say that. I haven't demanded it.
Is that the professional Christian?
Yeah. It does. It says, grant them a double portion, those who teach. It's talking about elders, so whatever that means. We don't pay our elders, though, so I guess you just get a double portion of nothing. But secondly, because, frankly, I would hate with a passion the burden of having to carry on like I am more important than any of you. That kind of spotlight, that kind of pressure to always be, you know, the holy man, you know. I mean, that kind of stuff. When people, you know, do I call you pastor? No, please just call me Derek. You know, it's just that, like, that sort of reverence. Be reverent to Jesus, right? I'm a broken sinner. I'm worse than you on your worst days, right? I need the gospel, and so the whole concept that grace matters, that grace is important, that grace is necessary, loses its value if I live in such a way where I feel like I don't need it. I need it more than any of you. And so, you know, I get really uncomfortable with that kind of culture in churches where pastors are sort of put up on a pedestal, because I'm like, the higher you put that man up, the harder he's going to crash and burn, because he's just like you. And in a lot of ways, he's probably more screwed up than you are, because God always has a way of using, you know, confounding the wise with the humble. And so I love, you know, don't ever think that if we get through one passage and it's because of a discussion like this, that I would rather have this and spend 5 literal years in this class than just get through the lesson to get through the lesson, because this is what it's really all about. You have a question?
Okay, sure. So I was thinking the vulnerability of the pastoral staff, because you can't really participate in a freedom group.
Right.
So,
But we have our ways. Let me explain that. So I realize that sounded a lot more nefarious than it really is. We do have, like Brian and I have gone through the 12-step group together. I'm actually in the Tuesday morning men's group. I started going several months ago now for that reason, because I don't ever want to be a pastor of a church that emphasizes freedom groups and then hasn't been in one in 15 years. So I go. And I will tell you that Tuesday morning group, God has taught me more things in the last few months that I have desperately needed in real life situations than I've learned in many of the classes I've been in before. So just to clarify, we don't have like audio recording devices or anything.
with James, he talks about Chuck Youngman. And, you know, that he was basically a sponsor, accountability partner, or whatever, and that he lost him recently, and that he, I don't know, but I'm assuming that he is, you know.
Well, Chuck wasn't his only guy.
Okay.
Chuck was a really important figure in his life for many reasons. But James has lots of other men in his life that are speaking into his life, saying hard things to him. I know because I'm one of them. And he is one of them to me.
Well, the one thing that impressed my mind when you first started coming, you always said that you and James always tell us the things that people don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And that's the person we need to be listening to.
Yeah.
Is the one that says the truth.
Yeah.
And so, you go to so many other churches, they're just giving you lip service, and it's routine and mundane, but here it's real. So you're speaking truth, and you tell, I love it when y'all just get right down and dirty on and tell the people the way it is.
Yeah.
And they need to hear that. I need to hear that. You know?
Amen. I'm glad to hear that because, you know, we're not masochists. We don't love it. I heard someone say, like, you know, ministry is full of like hard things, and if you ever get to a place where you enjoy them, you probably shouldn't be doing ministry anymore. I mean, you know, I think that's how it's supposed to be, but we do it because we need to hear it.
Well, the Lord speaks through you.
Right.
So, you know, it's really coming
Well,
from Him.
and that is the great thing, right, about being in a church where the word takes the center stage is like, I don't have to apologize for what I say.
You don't protect people from their Bible.
No.
It's
Yeah.
what Jesus said.
It's like what Spurgeon said, right? He said, like, the word is like a lion. You know, you don't have to defend a lion. You just let it out of its cage. It'll defend itself. And it's true. It's true. It's a good one. Spurge had a way. Any other thoughts before we close out this wonderful time together? I really have enjoyed this. It's been
I'd like to say something.
Yeah.
This discussion tonight is great, and I think, you know, we started out talking about favoritism and showing partiality and a little bit about cliques and this and that. And I think one of the keys is getting engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Engagement is so key. And the problem in any church is getting the people to engage in the programs of the church. And this church has done, you know, I've been to other churches before I came here, and this church, just the spirit in this church and the leadership, the pastoral leadership, leads people to want to engage.
Mhm.
And that's made a huge difference.
so true.
That's the reason I'm here.
Yeah.
I was invited, never been here before.
Yeah.
I knew one person, one that invited me. Parked out here, got out of my car, headed to the door, and 5 people told me, "Wow, good morning, I'm so glad you're here today." And I was almost in tears by the time I got to the door.
And now I bug you every week with a text message to come to my class, right?
And I
can't get
wasn't
rid of
going
us.
to tonight. I wasn't.
Well, I'm glad you're here.
I
We're
had a
all
lot of
glad you're
things
here.
going on, and I said, I think I need to be here tonight.
Amen. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. That's awesome. I really do. I love doing this, doing what I do, and I hope that when you come here, you get more than just knowledge, right? That you get some insight into how this works out in your life, and at the end of the day, you know, a clearer picture of how beautiful God's grace really is. When you measure up yourself and you realize you have a lot of shortcomings and a lot of failures and a lot of defects, and then you remember God not only loves you, but will use you to accomplish His purpose to reach other broken people. It's just really like one of the most humbling things. Sunday, while we were worshiping before second service, we were singing "Do It Again," and I really was like, I was legitimately almost moved to tears during that song, because that line, "I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again." And I just thought, like, how many mountains has God moved in my life? It's just it's like, it's mind-blowing. And the courage to say, I believe I'll see it happen again. I believe you will move again, is remarkable and wonderful. And so anyway, enough of that. I appreciate every one of you, and we will cover the 7 other verses next time. Bless you all.